Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Masha Sedova, who will be talking about surfing the motivation wave to create security behavior change. Masha?
Hey everybody, hope you're all nice and comfortable. I got your squishy chairs. This is definitely the most unique presentation mode I've ever done. I can't see any of you. And all these slides will be larger than I have ever seen them. So let's see how it all works out. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Masha Sedova, and I get the privilege of telling you a little bit about my favorite professional topic in the world, the intersection of human behavior and security. I want to just tell you a little bit about how the journey I took to get to this particular moment. I actually started in a much more traditional security field, did security forensic work, and then was a cyber analyst for the government. And along the way, I realized that security, at least in my perspective of it, was a lot of people attacking other people with a bunch of technology in the middle. And what I really wanted to start looking at was the human element of security. In 2012, I started the security engagement team at Salesforce that got to build up an amazing team that focused on the human elements of security for that organization, specifically around internal best practices for employees, secure development practices, and secure coding practices, and also secure feature adoption for our customers, like, hey, please turn on 2FA. It's good for all of us. From there, I left, and in January of 2017 started my own company, Elevate Security, which aims at creating a platform that drives security behavior change for employees across organizations. And it really leverages a lot of the work that I talk about here, as well as data analytics to provide every employee of every organization a meaningful and custom journey that really helps shift not just what they know about security, but how they behave and what they do. And at the end of the day, the thing that has been true for me in all of these positions is that I'm really obsessed with this question of what does it look like if we as people can get to the place where we want to do security instead of have to? And that's a question I'm really passionate about asking and finding answers about and exploring. And this presentation is a journey and a summary of a couple of my findings in this space. So let's get started. So often in the security world, there is one belief that says the employee is the weakest link. There are many different ways of having this presented to us, whether or not it's, wetware or it's the problem between the keyboard and the chair. But no matter how you look at it, none of these are very flattering. In fact, we don't call them human beings. We don't call them employees. We call them users. This is one perspective, and one that I would actually say is quite prevalent in the security world. There's a second variant that I want to introduce to you, and one that I firmly believe in my core, and that is that our employees and human beings can in fact be your first line of defense. And this is an amazing quote by Jesse Irwin that really resonates with me. And honestly, the fact that we haven't changed security behavior in our employees should in fact be a rallying cry and not a comfortable excuse. So, with that, I want to give you a quick overview around how we're doing things now and why I think it should change. So, how many of you in your organizations employ security training mostly for compliance sakes? Yeah, 2/3 or so, from what I can see. So the thing is, most audiovisual training based on learning studies have about 15% retention. And depending on the report you read, we have 90% breaches that are due to human errors. And if you consider patching as a human error, then it's probably even more than that. And so we keep introducing the same approach and again, hoping that if we tell our people what they're doing differently, they're going to change their behavior. But one of my favorite illustrations of this is the Lastpass survey, where they reached out and surveyed a whole bunch of users and found that even though we know our best practices, we don't in fact choose the right behavior. And so you may even recognize this in your own life, where knowing what good is doesn't mean you actually do it. We all know that we should exercise and eat lots of vegetables and not and not drink soda, and yet still we do these things. And so the question doesn't ultimately become, what is it we know, but ultimately, what is it that we do? And so one of the things that I like to step away from is realizing that if we keep doing this again and again, we're giving people training, better training, we're going to keep finding ourselves in the same place. And expecting different results is only going to make us all a little bit crazier. So I want to introduce to you all the concept of behavioral science. So behavioral science is essentially the study of how humans make decisions and how we create habits. And my work and what I want to introduce you here is how we can bring that study into security, and how you all as security practitioners can start introducing this kind of skill sets into your customers, to your employees, to the people that you work with often. Because at the end of the day, we as human beings have a lot of stuff going on. And while we think we would like employees to be, or our coworkers, to be really rational things that we can program and say, don't do this, and if you do this, or else. In fact, we're all very human and are full of dynamic decisions. And so this is probably my favorite cartoon of all time. But it summarizes sort of the human experience and how we can start applying what we know about the human experience to changing security behavior. So I want to introduce the model of security behavior change components. There are 3 things required for anybody to do something differently tomorrow than they're doing today. First of all, motivation. Second of all is the ability, and third is a trigger. So I'll give you an example as it relates to running. Let's say I really want to start running regularly. First of all, I need to want to start running. I either want to lose weight or prepare for a marathon, or I have some kind of event coming up. But if I don't care about wanting to go running, it doesn't matter if I have perfectly good shoes, right? And that's not going to shift my behavior. The perfectly good shoes comes into the number 2, ability. I may really care about running, but if I have a broken leg or if I don't have decent running sneakers, I am not able to go running. And the third one is a trigger. Is if I don't have a reminder, something in my day that allows me that kicks me in the butt and says, it's time to go for a run, either first thing in the morning or after lunch or whatever it is. I need all 3 of those things in order for me to start creating this habit. Now, all of this ultimately ties together in a really interesting model. So this is a model that Dr. B.J. Fogg out of Stanford University put out several years ago. And I want to bring your attention to the X and the Y axes that are really large. So motivation and ability have an inverse relationship to each other. The harder something is to do, the higher the motivation is needed in order for you to do this. Now, if you reflect back on your own life, that makes a lot of sense. If something's really easy, you don't really have to care that much about it to get it done. Now, if something is really hard, you really have to care about it. Or the other way around. You might really, really care about it. And so the fact that it is hard to do is you're able to overcome. And now this blue line is the line of action. If the trigger happens, something that reminds you that says, hey, you should go do this thing, if the right balance of motivation and ability exist, and when the moment the trigger happens, that action will happen. And if you do not have the right combination of motivation and ability, when that trigger happens, you will fail to do so. So that's a little bit of theory. Let's dive into some security specifics. First and foremost, let's start looking at the x-axis, the ability chart. If and where possible, if you can make something easier to do in your life, security or otherwise, you should do it, because motivation is a fickle thing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if you can make an action easier to do so, because that means you don't actually have to care that much about it. So let me show you some examples. So one of the security behaviors that we often ask of our organizations is for your average employee to have secure passwords for all sites. Now, what is hard to do is to remember 20 unique characters across 40 sites. That's cognitively a very difficult ask to do, and very few humans I know get to do this without writing them down in their little password notebook. Now, the way that you can do it with greater ease is to suggest installing a password manager. So where possible, using technology or systems or processes that can automate that decision and really take the load off of the individual is a huge, huge step forward. So how about reporting suspicious activity? So now there's a popular trend in the education space and to install the security awareness space to install a reporting button in email systems. And often organizations see huge spikes in reporting rates because of that. Some valid, some not. But if the goal is reporting, then that's what you're seeing. So it is hard to ask people to report and then put the load on them to look up the email, to send it, and hope that they get it right. And often you'll find that it goes wrong. So if you can make it easy by automating it, please do so. The last thing is tailgating. Having shifted an organizational's behavior around tailgating, it is incredibly difficult to ask someone to say, hey, stop, person I don't know behind me, show me your badge. Most people don't think that that's their job, and they feel like there's a security team, and there's a lot of social reasons why that's a very difficult ask. It is much easier to install a man trap or some kind of tailgating device, or even hire a security guard that will do that for you. So where possible, do make these security actions simplified. But what about the things that are hard to do and you can't simplify them? So when I was working at Salesforce and we were focusing on tailgating as the behavior, we didn't actually own any of the buildings we lived in. We worked in, Freudian sub. We worked in, and they were all leased. So we couldn't install physical devices, and so we had to get people to start confronting each other, and we had to get them to care about doing that because I couldn't simplify the action. So sometimes motivation is maybe your only choice, and this is an area I want to spend the rest of this talk on. So let's talk a little bit about how and where motivation occurs. So this is non-scientific graph, as you can see and imagine. But motivation, as I was mentioning earlier, is truly a fickle thing. And if you reflect back on your own motivation to do anything, whether or not it's cook dinner or do laundry, sometimes you really care about doing that. You really are motivated to get up and go do it. And sometimes you couldn't be moved to do it for all the things in the world. So the idea here is when we do have enough motivation, and we are at a high peak, that is a perfect time to ask either ourselves or whoever our audience is to do a hard action. It is important to realize that this is a fleeting state and should be used and capitalized to its maximum potential. So have a list in your back pocket of hard things that you can't get your employees to do on a regular basis, and wait for moments of high motivation, either as they happen organically or as you can help generate them. So, next question is, well, when do high points of motivation occur? So this is 2 examples of ways motivation show up for organizations as a whole. Now, I think motivation at an individual level can map maybe a little bit differently, but because we're talking about influential organizational change, I wanted to break these down into 2 categories. So first is predictable events. If we have an event coming up for us on the horizon and that we know we have to do something for, our motivation to do those behaviors get higher and higher the closer to the event are. Outside of the security world, this could be preparing for a test, right? Or a deadline for an exam. The closer we are to getting up on stage and speaking, the more likely we are to prepare our presentation the closer we get to the event, for example. So in the security world, what does that look like? Audits. Red team exercises that may potentially be predictable. I appreciate that red team exercises have different nuances, but if you knew there was some kind of assessment coming. How many of you have had the experience in your organization that just before an audit, things suddenly get patched? Yeah, yeah. Why is that? That's amazing, right? I've actually seen mappings of that. There's like number of patches, go all the way down and then back up again. And then when you look into like what happens on the lowest patch times, it's like the day before an auditor comes in. Again, because if patching is not automated, again, if you don't make it easy to do, then you need people to care about doing it and having time points when they care. Coming around the corner will drive that motivation. And as soon as that event happens, drops down, right? Now, how about unpredictable events? So these are the things that we don't see coming. And things like breaches in the news to either ourselves or people in our industries, incidents, if you, again, back to red team exercises that you didn't see coming and there was a readout. And all of a sudden, when people learn of some kind of activity, they have really high motivation. Like, oh man, Equifax just happened. We really want to make sure it doesn't happen to us. What can we do, right? So the Monday after that hits the news, and if you didn't know about that ahead of time, you will organizationally have more momentum to start shifting those behaviors. So great, that's nice to know. What do you do about that? One of my favorite quotes, and there's probably been a handful of books that I have read along the way that have been incredibly influential in helping me understand these concepts. And one of these is a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And he says in his book, good leaders seize crises to remake organizational habits. And so taking the opportunity for events like these, predictable or unpredictable, to do hard things is probably one of the greatest superpowers I can offer you. One of the things that I have seen done in an organization that I've worked with in the past was we waited for, we really wanted to roll out multi-factor authentication across a huge number of parts of the organization. And it was difficult to get emotional and mental and financial buy-in to do that because it was going to cause a lot of process changes, right? As is natural for any organization. And so I don't know that we did this logically, but it ended up working really well. But we waited until an incident occurred that got up to an executive level, and the next day the executives came to the security team and said, "Oh my gosh, how do we prevent this from ever happening?" And we pulled out of our back pocket a well-designed plan that said, great, we would like to roll out multi-factor authentication to all of our users across the organization. And we did it in 40 days across several tens of thousands of employees, which was a very hard thing to do. And so waiting for moments like that, either at a smaller scale for your particular team or department or for a larger scale for your organization, can be an incredibly powerful move. So what about the times when you don't have really large-scale breaches coming down the pipe? You can't predict them. How do you generate motivation? So one of the things I've learned along the way is that we as human beings are kind of wired to care about the things that we care about. And rarely do people come out of the womb and be like, I really care about security. Really, that's my thing, right? If that happens, you're probably in this room. For the rest of the organization, that's not really the thing. But we as human beings care about many different things. And so the goal for us as security practitioners is to tie security to the things that we already care about as human beings. So I may care about recognition and acknowledgement in front of my peers. Can I do that through security? Yes, I listed here praise and punishment and money as being less impactful than intrinsic reward, but those are still powerful motivators. And so can you reward people for excellent security behavior? We do plenty fine job with punishing people for security behavior. I don't think that that's an area we really need to be focusing on. But can we tie things like interest, achievement, curiosity to something like security? And Another book that's been really influential for me is Drive by Daniel Pink, and he says this really well. People will do things because they matter. They're interesting and part of something more important. So can we tie security to this? Punchline, yes we can. So one of the things that I wanted to tell you a little bit about, the last thing on the previous slide that said social acceptance and social belonging. For many of us as human beings, being socially accepted is important. So there's a concept in behavioral science called social proof. This is something that I come across relatively recently in my work, and it, again, feels like another superpower. So social proof, however, has been around for a long time. And there's two different ways that I'm displaying here on this chart in very fuzzy print. Okay, so the first is Kourtney Kardashian, which may not be your version of celebrity social proof, but imagine there are people in the world who look up to her from like a beauty perspective, and you can say, oh, well, if Kourtney uses it, then like I should use that lipstick. Again, someone I respect and admire and I look up to is doing this. There's also an element of social proof of everyone else is doing this, and so there must be something to this. I don't have enough time to judge whether or not this is good or bad for me, and so if other people have the influence to do that, then, or have the time to do that, their influence is good enough for me. So what does that look like in the security space? So Savik Das of Georgia Institute of Technology did a really cool study that he presented at Enigma of last year, where he presented these prompts at on Facebook logins for a subset of users to see if he could drive multi-factor authentication adoption in their usage. And so you can see in the control, I don't know, yeah, you can read that, okay. You can see that in the control, he just said, this is a good security move, please do it. And in the social context, he said, X amount of your friends, 180 of your friends use extra security settings, you should too. He's also, and he actually found that in the social context here, he was able to get 1.36 times more installs than just normal settings. Interestingly enough, he also found that the celebrity proof, there's like, hey, someone in your network is also using this, could sometimes backfire. If it was like not a person you respected or whose opinion you liked and trusted, I don't want to be like that guy. I guess I shouldn't install 2FA. That seems like a dumb idea. So careful who you draw analogies to. So that's one example. A way that this is showing up in my work right now is by showing how people's specific security behaviors relate to their team, to their department, to their organization, to their best in class. So as you can see on the right-hand side here, what we've been doing is pulling in data sets and analytics and showing how every individual compares to their department. And in places where they're doing below average, we tell them how many times more likely they are to compromise based on their own performance. And places where they're actually great, we give them a badge and say, you're actually doing a great job, carry on. And then on the left-hand side, we actually call out social influencers. And here, if we go up as high up in the organization as it makes sense. So if you're the CEO of this company who is using it, please install Lastpass. We actually found that we did a company-wide organization. We found that for Lastpass rollout, like 28% adoption in 48 hours because of this type of notification. So really exploring how we use this to drive motivation. This is interesting because people may not care about security. No matter how much I really want them to, but they do care about belonging. So what about other types of motivation? And if you saw in the previous, a couple slides back, where it said there's punishment and there's reward. Why should we use reward instead of punishment? Why is it more effective? Now, I want to share with you a study that Dr. John Gottman did out of Harvard University in the early 90s. He interviewed 700 newlyweds for 15 minutes. And with 94% accuracy, he was able to predict which of those couples were going to get divorced the next 5 years. And the secret magic ratio that he came up with is that those couples had 5 sets of positive interactions to every 1 negative in order to maintain a successful relationship. Now, if you think about organizational departments as having relationships, in order to have a trusting one where you're willing to say, I made a mistake, could you maybe help me clean up my now infected laptop? Or I need advice, I'm not really sure how to architect this. If you want to build a trusting relationship, if you have spent the rest of your time saying you're doing all this wrong, what are the chances that your fellow employees are going to come to you and say, hey, can you help me? Now, this has also been done as a business study, and And there was a study that came out in 2004 that found that the highest performing teams had 5.6 times 5.6 times positive feedback to every one negative. So medium performing teams had 1.9, so almost 2 pieces of positive feedback to every one negative. And low performing teams had a third as many positive pieces of feedback to each other to every one negative. So they were, or one positive. So they were criticizing each other almost 3 times as much as they were rewarding each other. And so the idea here is it's not just for relationships, but it's also for high-performing teams and organizations as a whole. So then how do you create positive engagements with your employees? So these are 5 categories of motivational types that I'm going to walk through some examples of what it would look like to roll out positive, motivating campaigns to your organization, again, that drives people's desires to engage with security. So the first thing is status. We really care about getting on top of the board. I find this works really well for executives and for salespeople. There's competition, so capture the flag and bug bounties. I really like to compete and I like to win. Altruism. This is an area that I feel like security people really can maximize and say, you know, your work contributes to saving the day. You stopped this attack. You have saved us this much money. That might not work. So, but you have saved this much data from being leaked, for example, and your actions have this type of impact. And champion programs are a great category in this. Access. This is one of my favorite to use, like things that money can't buy. So because you did this, now you get a lock-picking class or parking spot or lunch with an executive, whatever works for your culture. And then achievement. Again, this is not true for every organization or even every department, but elements of accomplishments, so recognition emails, thank you emails to your management. Hey, you reported a phishing email that no one else caught. Replying that to your individual and then CCing the manager gets you things that, let's say, money could never buy. So wrapping this all up, if we look back at the motivation versus ability chart, it's really important to remember that both of those things are really critical to have when we're trying to ask someone to do something differently. And where possible, we absolutely should try to make that ask easier for them to do and understand why our customers, our employees, whoever we work with, are potentially finding blockers and help them unblock those and making the action easier to do. And in places where we can't make that action easier to do, we really have to focus on motivation. So really leveraging the tides of motivational peaks in our organization and as the normal process of business takes us, and where the gaps there are introduced, generating motivation, tying it to things that we already care about as human beings, can be used to really get someone to show up and take security actions. And again, where possible, do balance the number of times we say negative things and balance it with at least 5 positive elements of recognition for security action. And with that, I think I probably have like 2 minutes for questions. Yeah. Oh.
Make my way over there.
So one of the challenges I always have with motivation is how do you get the company to care about contractors or parts of the company that generally aren't allowed to access so many of these programs that would, provide, a piece of swag or something.
Yeah. Do you have an example of what you would want a contractor to do? Any number of security behaviors? All of it?
Generally comply with all the normal security behaviors because they generally do the same kinds of work as full-time employees.
Yeah, that's a good point. And contractors are slightly tricky. Yeah, they're less resourced. The thing that comes to mind naturally is punishment. Like if you'd like your contractor to keep going, then you should keep doing that. And that's not great. You could turn it around and find examples where contractors who have exhibited excellent postures, whatever that looks like, so completed their training on time, keeps their patches up to date, and give that feedback back to your employment organization. Say, this is a contractor that has done excellent work. Can we give them some kind of security badge or status? And so that I, as an employer, will continue to want to keep hiring those people. And so you are incentivizing their future work based on their past performance. And if it doesn't cost their, like the secondary, like if there's a hiring firm or somewhere that they can have this accreditation held, it doesn't have to be a formalized accreditation, it could help get them future jobs, which can incentivize that.
I think we're out of time.
Great.
Thank you, Asha.
Yeah, absolutely. This presentation will be available around for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.